When Star Wars, as A New Hope was originally known, became a box office phenomenon, if not quite a critical sensation, in 1977, it brought with it a sense of optimism and exhilaration missing from both entertainment and, for many, the everyday world. It had heroes you could believe in and become invested in their hopes and struggles, and melodramatic villains you could disdain with impunity, not for a moment needing to check your boon privileges in case they were just misunderstood intergalactic refugees. Likewise, the Death Star's infamous destruction of Alderaan put to bed any notion that the Empire was simply cosmic enforcers who'd gotten a little heavy-handed in their rule. When George Lucas was first considering creating a script for a swashbuckling science fantasy extravaganza, it was not the tale of a callow farm boy, a roguish pirate, and a sparky princess that dominated his time, but rather how to acquire the movie license of a property consigned then, much as it is now, to the dust-strewn attic of the public's imagination. Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon proved to be out of reach of the fledgling filmmaker. King Features Syndicus cost too prohibitive for Lucas at the time. Were the Lucas of today to have a spur-of-the-moment yen to dust off his director's hat and reignite the character, there's little doubt there'd be any such impediment today, the barriers now being only time and inclination. So, what would such a movie have looked like had George Lucas managed to acquire the license to Flash Gordon more than 40 years ago? And given that he wouldn't have owned the characters, would there have been anything like the merchandising juggernaut of Star Wars, even if the hypothetical movie had been as big of a hit? I think it's unlikely that the public would have ever taken to Flash, Zarkov, Dale and Ming the way they did to Luke, Han, Leia and Vader, as the former were definitively characters of their time, rather than the stuff of mainstay archetypes. The former characters' backgrounds, their look, even if dressed up in modern-day get-up and quippy dialogue, will unlikely ever capture any wave of frenzied popularity. Not because they're weak characters, but rather because tastes have evolved to the point where it's hard to see how they would ever have been seen as anything other than hand-me-downs from Star Wars and Marvel, rather than the other way around. Just like 2012's John Carter was assumed by many audiences to be a Star Wars and Avatar cash grab, despite being created in the 1910s, so too Flash Gordon's 30s aesthetic might be misinterpreted now as much the same. Director Mike Hodges' Flash Gordon, released in 1980, sought to preclude under-researched accusations of plagiarism by mainstream audiences by inserting a montage of comic strip artwork from writer-artist Raymond's original run on the property. Set to Queen's pulse-pounding, if conspicuous signature song, the sequence works to debatable effect, inviting us to consider the character's pre-war pedigree by the dated, though still captivating art style. The movie tried, for some reason, to withdraw from the formula of verisimilitude of Star Wars and 1978 Superman in favour of Art Deco revivalism and camp excess, which although were proved to serve the movie well for many, perhaps alienated audiences now well used to being spellbound rather than simply entertained. There was humour, action, and state-of-the-art special effects wizardry to spare, but little of the sense of audacity Lucas or Richard Donner had managed to invest in their own works. The term lampshading describes the sense of apologetic self-awareness a writer might slip into their script, as a way of pointing out to the viewer that they're well aware of how downright improbable a certain line or situation might be. Hodges' Flash Gordon, produced by Dino De Laurentiis, might be considered a movie crammed wall-to-wall with lampshading, even if while never quite explicitly stating its outlandishness to the viewer. Written by Lorenzo Semple Jr., who also penned 1966's movie adaptation of perhaps the definitive smorgasbord of camp that was the Batman TV series of the time, we've perhaps seen the truest iteration of Flash Gordon, beyond Alex Raymond's beautifully crafted comic strips. George Lucas, had he managed to get his hand on the wheel, would certainly have sought to lend his own adaptation a sense of visual dynamism, the property space battles, and a lived-in quality to worlds such as Mongo, Arborea and Phrygia, but perhaps wouldn't have strayed as far from the outmoded fin-tail rockets of the source material as we might have hoped. the visionary created the Millennium Falcon, X-Wings and TIE fighters perhaps wouldn't have been as motivated to lend such weight of beyond-the-box design to Flash Gordon if he had not been the world's creator or had anything like the stake in merchandising as he would score for himself with Star Wars. Likewise, the characters may have been updated to grand effect, but it's impossible to imagine the general cinema-going public finding anyone of such both visual and visceral impact as Darth Vader in any iteration of Ming the Merciless, or becoming as invested in the off-world daring-do of an accomplished polo player, or, indeed, football quarterback, as they would in Luke's relatable pining for exploration and evolving search for meaning that we saw over the course of the original trilogy. What might have been the luckiest break ever caught by mainstream audiences occurred the moment George Lucas resigned himself to the fact that if he was going to film an outlandish space opera with a modern flourish, he would have to create it from scratch, and more so, resurrect the special effects industry from the ashes into a phoenix that for good or ill has long burned much brighter than that which came before Industrial Light and Magic. Speaking for myself, I loved Mike Hodges' 1980 Flash Gordon for what it was. It was a real kaleidoscope of action, surreal humour, and I think that it's something that is probably an acquired taste and very much of its time. I don't think you'd be able to show it to a millennial, for example, and ever hope for them to get out of it what they might still get out of the original trilogy, though I could be well wrong on that one. What do you think about George Lucas dusting Flash Gordon down for modern times? Do you think that if he had an inclination to, could he do a good job of it? Maybe if he was serving as producer, could he rein in the right talent to give this property renewed credibility? Or does such property need to be done at all? Is it something that's best left to history and for audiences to craft their own characters, create their own stories fresh? Maybe George Lucas is doing us a favour by not pursuing filmmaking anymore as we know it, but who knows? I'd love to see what his take on Flash Gordon would be one way or the other. Maybe it could still happen. If you're enjoying the content, please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you around.